Welcome to the Dad Show podcast. How y'all doing?
It's part 1 today. Is that correct, Lincoln?
Yes.
Thank y'all for listening. Have a great day.
You too.
Welcome to the Dad Show podcast, a show all about impacting, empowering, inspiring, and uplifting information to become a better dad, husband, man, and mentor. And now, your host, Ryan Ladd.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank y'all for coming back to the Dad Show podcast. I got Mr. Scott Sutter. It's spelled Sutter, but it is Mr. Sutter.
Right.
So he's on the podcast today. Him and his wife, I asked that you go and check out their podcast. It's called the Banter and Bliss podcast that him and his wife did. They got some great content on there, social media and through the podcast as well. So I asked that you go check them out. Really, really good stuff for couples, for parents, and just everyday activities and stuff of that nature. So Scott, man, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today, brother.
Yeah, awesome. You bet. I appreciate that introduction as well. We think it's good stuff. You know, we like to share a little bit about the family and specifically our marriage. And the reason we started the podcast is, my wife and I both, we've kind of spent a lot of time, I think, not just like being around great married couples, but also being in homes where the parents stayed together. And one thing that we try to communicate about marriage is it's not easy at all times. It's not trial free. There's no, if you do it right, it won't be hard or anything like that. I think that the designation of marriage is that it's meant to be difficult because it's meant to be a self-sacrifice and it's meant to be a reflection in ways of our relationship with Christ and what he did for us through sacrifice. I think the most successful marriages are the ones that the two spouses are every single day trying to put their spouse ahead of themselves and almost competing for who can do that better and more. And one thing that I like to say about that is that's a competition that everybody wins, right? When both spouses are competing to put the other one ahead of themselves more, everybody's going to win that, including the children, including the kids in the household. So we start the podcast to encourage families, encourage couples, and we kind of doing it on the heels of the idea that we have done a date night every week since we got married. So every single week since we got married, we'd gone out on a date and prioritized each other in that way. And even after having children, I mean, my wife was, I think, one day postpartum after our first, and we went on a date together. So we found ways at times during COVID to go on dates at the house once the kids went to sleep, order DoorDash and put a movie on or something along those lines. She decorated our attic one time and we went up there and did a date night in the attic or what have you.
That's so awesome, man. That's so powerful that you continue that connection every week. Like us going through our struggles with my kids' rare disease and all the stuff that comes along with that, plus work and podcast, just everything. We may find once a month to do a date night to get together if we are able to catch that. So that is so great that you all take that time and make that time and schedule it every week. No matter if it's at home, it's in the attic or, whatever the case may be, man, that's so strong and such good advice that, to do that. And one little point I want to go back to that you mentioned a little bit earlier, it's that competition between the wife and the husband to try and be better or, try to do more. And it's not really a competition, but, along those lines, I say that it should be 100-100 between the two, not 50-50 or not 70-30, but there's going to come those times whenever one of yous are 30 and 170, and you got to be that rock for that person to bring them back up to 100, and
right.
And just constantly that battle. But it's a good battle, right? Like just being there for each other, supporting and taking care of, and aside from your marriage and your relationship, like you said, the kids grasping that aspect and holding on to that like my mom and dad don't just kind of not see eye to eye and then they go their separate ways. No, they battled to be stronger together. And the kids learn, like you've got boys and girls, both of them on both sides. And I've got a girl and a boy. Like a dad, it's really tough on that aspect, because you have to show your son how to treat a woman and be there for them and be their rock and protect them and love them and be vulnerable at times. But then you've got to show the other side of the daughter that, you know, that's what a man is supposed to treat me like. And so
Sure.
like we both got it hard, and man, it sounds like you're doing a great job. So I just want to tell you that, man.
I appreciate that. I always tell people I'm a work in progress, right? we all are. We're all working towards that sanctification.
1% better every day is still a gain, man. It's still.
That's right. That's right. And just to kind of, circle back on something that you had mentioned there, which is, so during those times where you kind of lean on your spouse, and your spouse is, I believe, a God-given asset, that can hold parts of you up, when you need it. Right. And it's, again, not everybody is at their absolute strongest at all times. And so when you have a marriage built on mutual love and respect, you can lean on your spouse in a very meaningful way during those hard times. And that came for us, and has come for us several different times, but really, really big when my father passed away a couple of years ago, back in 2018. And he got diagnosed in January with a brain tumor, and had passed away by July. So it was about a 6-month, healthy man, ran every day, ran marathons, didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't, do anything crazy, and got a brain tumor and passed away. And during that time, we had 2 children under the age of 3. And for parents out there who have children that are young, how difficult that is. For parents out there who have, lost loved ones, how difficult that is, right? And so that time was a period that I always reflect back on and think about how special and powerful the love and respect of my wife was to carry me at times through those moments where I felt like I needed to be at the hospital with my mom and my dad and my siblings, to know that she was there to kind of support me and at times fill some of the gaps for my children that, I was just out a lot during that time frame to take care of some other stuff. I mean, Dad was basically in the hospital for 5 straight months, right? More or less, off and on, but spent a lot of time at those hospitals, and she just held down the fort during that time. And I was definitely not at 100%, and she was, she was doing a lot of providing a lot of grace, and also just holding me up in a really meaningful way. And one of the things I just like to, kind of brag on her for. There is literally nobody else in the world that could offer me what my wife can offer me. She knows me better than anybody else knows me. She has more to give me than there's anybody else in the world that could possibly give me. And so I hopefully am going to do my absolute best to praise her as much as I possibly can, every opportunity I get.
And that's so huge to build her up, through everything. So I'm a firefighter, and, a lot of, unfortunate in the emergency service, a lot of broken marriages and stuff of that nature. So you hear a lot of dogging my wife, like, my wife don't do this. My wife don't do that. And man, like, keep all that at home. Like, keep that, like, you don't go out dogging your wife. Like, you want to continue to be, even though I know it's a special situation with what you went through and how she supported you and was there for you through the whole thing. But man, like, just in general, every day, don't go out dogging your wife. Like, that is your wife. That is your prized possession.
That's right.
You're supposed to love your wife as Christ loved the church.
That's right.
You just don't go out dogging your wife. I understand, like, she may do this and she may do that. That stays at home. That stays with you.
Right.
One question that comes out of what you just described, man, is how strong was that with you, and how much did it mean to you that you knew that you had that support while you were at the hospital, or while you're running errands for your parents, or just your general errands that you had to run? Like, no matter what, you knew that the home front was taken care of, your kids were taken care of, and just that support of your wife. Like, how much did that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, so I talk about, like, I'm I talk about my dad a lot in the context of like, people go through grief, they lose loved ones. And it's never really been like a sense of like painful tears for me. Like if I cry, it's mostly, for fond reasons. But whenever I think about my wife and what she did for me during that time, the reason it moves me to tears is because that is something that, it's so hard to find. It's so hard to find somebody who is going to allow you in some of the times where you have to be strong for a lot of other people, for you to come back and still be vulnerable with them. So personally, it meant a lot to me because she was kind of the only person I had the luxury of being vulnerable for. So I've got 2 biological sisters, 2 adopted sisters, and then a brother. And I just had to be strong and a mom, right? And I had to be as strong as I could for a lot of them during that time. But grief for me, grief lasted about 2.5 years, and the only person that I really ever felt like I was able to be vulnerable with, besides in prayer, was my wife, and her, I guess, grace and willingness to allow me to do that. There's almost no words to describe what it meant to me and what it continues to mean to me, and how that experience of losing my father, and kind of, again, when you become a parent, you're thrust into maturity in a very quick way. When you go through things like losing a loved one, you're also thrust into maturity. And you and I spoke about this ahead of time, but when you go through some of the things that you guys have gone through, you're thrust into maturity, right? And these deeper and deeper ways. And so over the last couple of years since he has passed away, I've actually progressed and I think grown in my professional life in a really substantial way, to the point where I'm in a position now that I didn't think I'd be in by the time I was 33. And I have to give her 100% of the credit, her and God, all the credit for that, because during that time frame where so many people lose a loved one and their lives either come to a halt or they fall apart or whatever you want to call it, God blessed me with a tremendous amount of joy and gratefulness for my dad, and he blessed me with a wife that just never wavered in her faithfulness to me and her patience with me and her grace to me. And so I know I'm going on and on about this, but
no, it's worth going on and on for, man. I mean, she was so strong and supportive of you, and that means, like you said, no matter in your job or you're running a 5K or, anything like this, the support, not even just from a wife, but even from a husband's standpoint, the support of a spouse, knowing they're going to have your back 100%, no matter what, is so strong, man. It makes you, you could be at like 65, 70% going into whatever you're going to do. But whenever you feel that support of your spouse 100%, like you jump more.
That's right.
And you may get up to your 90 to 100% going into it. And you're going to do a lot better because it's just so, it's like when somebody's praying for you, you know what I mean? Like there's people on the street that pass you and you're like, man, I'm praying for you. And they may or may not. But when you know somebody is praying for you and you feel that power in the prayer, like how much more momentum it gives you, that's the same way with your support of your spouse. Like it just makes you almost have supernatural power with whatever you're doing. And, man, that's so strong. Really, really. So we went on and on about your wife and and I'm very grateful, but man, I want to, sounds like your dad had a lot of influence on your life growing up. And so, if you don't care, kind of, let's talk a little bit about him, like what influence he had growing up, as you brought up in this situation. Let's just hear about your dad, man. I'm really excited about this.
Perfect. So I've got enough content on my dad to, I think, write a whole novel. So I'll do my best to pause, intentionally so that we can dialogue about it. But, my dad was, about 6'4". He was incredibly handsome, in my opinion, as his son. And, one of the most, I think, like gentle, mild-tempered people that most people who met him would agree, like in kind of the upper echelon in terms of like gentleness, patience, and humility. He got saved when he was about 26 years old and raised 4 children who all love the Lord and are walking with the Lord. And then my mom and him adopted another young girl before he passed, and then my mom has since adopted another girl. So he was about 62 years old when he...
That's special,
ahead,
man.
sorry.
That's special. I'm sorry. I can't just let that little
Sure.
tidbit pass, like that she's raised well together with your father, and they adopted while he was alive, and then even after his passing, that she adopted another. Man, that's wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And we always say that he just like had these crazy friends that it's like, how in the world did you become friends with that person? Well, I met him during a inner city mission trip and we just stayed in touch, and now they come to the house and hang out with us once a month. It was just like, it's like the kind of, he's like, we always said he loved the unlovable, right? He always loved the unlovable, which is what Jesus did. So again, like just another amazing testimonial, element, but that kind of manifested itself in the form of adoption, as he was kind of late in his life. They started fostering and then eventually adopted, the older of my 2 adopted sisters. And then they fostered my younger adopted sister. And then when he got sick, she moved into a different home for a time being. And then after he passed away, she came back, and then mom eventually adopted her. But yeah, because I've seen it firsthand, I can kind of understand and appreciate a little bit more than probably the average person does that hasn't seen it firsthand. But like, adoption is not for the faint of heart. It is just a very, you have to have a massive heart to adopt and to go through kind of that entire pursuit. And then at the end of the day, your reward is to raise a child, right? And that's, speaking from a parent's perspective, raising a child is not an easy thing to do. And if you add the element of it not being your biological child, you are making an active decision to love this human being that you have no kind of like birthright over, right? And so it's a very difficult thing. And again, like just tremendous people adopt, like just uniquely gifted, loving people go through that whole process. And so I can't say enough wonderful things about that, exactly about that element, right? Like, and I'm happy to dwell on that a little bit more, but that was just kind of, again, it knowing him as long as I did, it didn't surprise me at all that he had a heart for it, because, his spirit and his perspective of his own faith was, he never lost sight of the fact that he did not deserve the love of Jesus. And when you live your entire life as a Christian, knowing that I don't deserve the love of Jesus, it creates such a pure faith and such a powerful faith that is just like nothing short of moving and inspiring. And he said, and I've quoted this 8 million times, so anybody that's watching this probably knows what I'm about to say, but if you've heard me say it before, but when he first got diagnosed, I remember, and this is a man that I watched, I would come home at 3 a.m. from being out with friends, and he'd be on his knees in prayer, and it was just, I watched my entire life be so faithful. And then he said this when he got diagnosed. He said, I was roadkill on the side of the road, and Jesus came and scraped me up and put me at his table. And I remember being like, man, what a perspective to have after being saved for 30 years, 40 years, to have the perspective, this point of the children you've raised and the mission work you've done in the ministry that you've served in, to still feel that way about the love of Jesus. I mean, it just was so moving, like so powerful. And he carried a lot of that through his whole sickness, but growing up, he was such a goofy guy too. Like, he was just like he kind of did this intentional aloof thing where he would like pretend he didn't understand what you were saying. So then he would like requote some version of what he heard you say. And so he was always just such a goofball growing up. And we did this thing when he passed away, actually, that we started an email account for everybody that knew my dad, that was basically like Jim Sutter stories at gmail.com. And they all would email their stories in about him. which was pretty cool. It was phenomenal. And so we had all these hilarious stories pouring in about our dad, but, so many people knew that side of him, but the side that they didn't know was, when I was going through middle school, I talked about this in his eulogy, which is online, somewhere, but, when I was going through middle school, I struggled with a lot of anxiety and depression's probably too strong of a word, but just kind of like hopelessness. And when you're 12, Jesus sacrificing himself on the cross oftentimes doesn't carry the weight that it does when you reach the age of accountability and fully understand it. But what happened when I went through all that time through all that like anxiety and fear, was that my dad was always right there. He would stay up late with me and talk. He would read scripture to me. He would pick me up from school and take me out to get ice cream and just talk, right? And not always about like, how do you feel? But just like, he was just there. And so again, the thing that always, like as an adult reflecting back on these moments, especially when he did pass away, the reflection that I had was just like, what a great image of God the Father. Dad didn't solve the problems that I faced. Like I didn't feel instantly like all my fears and anxieties were just gone. But when I needed to turn to someone, he was always there.
Thank you for watching part 1 and come back tomorrow for part 2. Thank you for listening to the Dad Show podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Dad Show podcast. Please like, review, and subscribe.